short time ago, the United States military began major combat operation that you must lay down your weapons and have complete immunity.
What you are about to hear is a detailed, factual analysis of the military conflict that began between the United States, Israel, and Iran. This is news-based reporting on documented events and their consequences.
Central Command, who says in a historic first, long-range precision strike missiles were used in combat in Operation Epic Fury, providing...
In the morning, at 9:45 a.m. Iranian time, joint U.S. and Israeli forces launched Operation Epic Fury. The decision came after weeks of escalating tensions, failed diplomatic negotiations, and massive military buildup. U.S. President Donald Trump had authorized the operation from Air Force One at 3:38 p.m. Eastern Standard Time the previous day. The scope was unprecedented. Israeli Air Force jets, approximately 200 fighter jets in the largest combat sortie in the country's history, struck over 500 military targets across western and central Iran. The United States conducted dozens of strikes using planes based around the Middle East and from aircraft carrier strike groups. In the first 24 hours alone, Israel deployed over 1,200 bombs. American nuclear submarines fired Tomahawk cruise missiles from the Arabian Sea. Within hours, intelligence communities reported strikes on air defense systems, missile launchers, naval vessels, military bases, and government facilities across Tehran, Isfahan, Qom, Karaj, and Kermanshah. The human toll became immediately apparent. Iran reported that thousands of Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps personnel were killed or wounded. Intelligence agencies estimated between 3,000 and 5,000 military casualties on the first day. But the target list extended beyond military sites. Civilian infrastructure was damaged. Schools took hits. Hospitals sustained damage. The Grand Bazaar in Tehran, a UNESCO heritage site, was struck. Golestan Palace, another UNESCO World Heritage Site, sustained debris damage. The centerpiece of the operation was the assassination of Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. US and Israeli intelligence had monitored Khamenei's movements for months. Their surveillance confirmed he would be in the Pasteur Street district of Tehran, where his residence, the Presidential Palace, and the National Security Council offices were located. He was meeting with his top military and security officials. The compound was struck. Khamenei was killed. So were his daughter, son-in-law, grandchild, and daughter-in-law, according to Iranian state media. Additional senior officials died in the same strikes. Defense Minister Aziz Naserzadeh, IRGC Commander Mohammad Pakpour, Defense Council Secretary Ali Shamkhani, and 4 Ministry of Intelligence officials. In total, 7 senior Iranian security and defense leaders were confirmed dead. Some estimates placed the number of senior officials killed as high as 40. Iranian state media declared 40 days of mourning. The operation was explicitly designed to achieve regime change. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio later disclosed that the initial attack was launched because Israel intended to strike Iranian leadership, which would have left U.S. forces vulnerable. By attacking simultaneously with Israel, U.S. officials reasoned they could control the scope and intensity of Iran's response. They were wrong about that calculation. Iran's response came within hours. Rather than the days-long delay that characterized previous Iranian retaliations, this response was nearly instantaneous. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps named their operation Operation True Promise 4. They launched ballistic missiles and attack drones at targets across the Persian Gulf region. Iran struck Israel directly. Missiles hit Tel Aviv and Haifa. They also targeted U.S. military bases across the Middle East. Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar received strikes. Ali Al Salem Air Base in Kuwait was hit. Al Dhafra Air Base in the United Arab Emirates made an impact. The U.S. Navy 5th Fleet Headquarters in Bahrain reported missile strikes. Iran also struck civilian infrastructure in countries across the region. Iran reported it had fired over 500 ballistic missiles and deployed nearly 2,000 drones since February 28. Nearly 40% of those were directed at Israel. The remainder targeted U.S. military installations and regional allies. The targeting strategy was telling. Iran struck not only Israel and U.S. positions but also civilian infrastructure in the Gulf states: Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Oman, Qatar, and Bahrain. Attacks hit oil refineries. A strike on Ras Laffan, Qatar's main gas facility, coincided with an unexplained shutdown of the installation. Shipping through the Strait of Hormuz slowed to a standstill. Over 150 freight ships, many carrying oil, were stalled. Iran closed the strait to international shipping. An IRGC general stated publicly that Iran would target all economic hubs in the Middle East. Another warned that any ship attempting to transit the Strait of Hormuz would be attacked. The message was strategic. Iran could not defeat the US and Israel militarily, but it could disrupt the global energy supply. But something remarkable happened during the early strikes. Reports from within the U.S. military and intelligence community suggested that the initial damage assessments from the government were not matching what satellites and ground observers were actually seeing. U.S. officials claimed massive destruction of Iranian military capability. Israel declared that Iranian air defenses had been decimated. But as the war continued past the first week, Iranian ballistic missiles kept launching. Iranian drones kept flying. Iranian submarines kept operating. Iranian naval vessels, while suffering losses, continued to contest the Persian Gulf. Military analysts noted something troubling. Iran appeared to have rationed its remaining missiles rather than expending them in full. This suggested Iran still retained significant reserves, perhaps as many as 1,000 ballistic missiles remaining, despite a week of continuous strikes. If Iranian forces were rationing missiles this carefully, it meant Iran was planning for a much longer conflict than U.S. planners had apparently assumed. The intelligence failure ran deeper. Classified after-action reports began circulating within the U.S. military indicating that pre-war assessments of Iranian military readiness may have been inflated. Strategic surprise, something the U.S. and Israel had achieved tactically, had not translated into destroying Iran's capacity to fight. Iran's command structure had adapted faster than predicted. New leadership emerged within hours of Khamenei's death. The IRGC continued executing operations largely independent of central government authority. One senior defense official later acknowledged privately that the strike had been intended to produce rapid regime collapse. Instead, Iran had adapted, compartmentalized, and continued fighting. What began as strikes on Iran expanded rapidly into a region-wide conflict. Hezbollah in southern Lebanon launched attacks on Israel in retaliation for Khamenei's assassination. Israel responded with strikes on southern Lebanon, Beirut, and the Bekaa Valley. The U.S. Navy Fifth Fleet began reporting Iranian drone attacks from multiple directions simultaneously. Iraqi militia groups that had been dormant activated. The Islamic resistance in Iraq claimed responsibility for over 23 drone strikes on U.S. assets in Erbil. Pro-Iranian Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq reported operations against U.S. bases. The conflict spread geographically in ways the initial strike planners had not fully contained. Missiles had landed in Turkey, prompting NATO Article 4 discussions. Greece deployed frigates and F-16s to defend Cyprus after Iranian drones struck the British military base at Akrotiri. Italy, the Netherlands, and Spain sent warships to defend the island. Britain positioned the aircraft carrier HMS Prince of Wales on advanced readiness. Turkey deployed F-16s to northern Cyprus. A ballistic missile launched from Iran was intercepted over Turkish airspace by NATO integrated air defense systems, the first time NATO forces had engaged Iranian missiles. Turkey asserted its right to self-defense under Article 5 of the NATO treaty. The alliance convened emergency meetings to discuss collective response. The human toll accumulated rapidly. The Pentagon had confirmed 7 American military personnel killed. Dozens more were wounded. Israeli forces reported 2 soldiers killed and over 2,100 injured. Israeli civilians suffered significant casualties as well. 16 killed and 2,142 injured from incoming missiles and drones. Iranian civilian casualties were substantially higher. A U.S. airstrike on a girls' elementary school in Minab killed approximately 180 people, according to Iranian state media, mostly school children. The school was located near a military complex, but the civilian casualties were immense. Thousands attended the burial. According to the Iranian Red Crescent, over 65 schools and 32 medical facilities had been deliberately targeted. Over 10,000 civilian sites had sustained damage. Hospitals were overwhelmed. Medical supplies were depleted. One strike on a water desalination plant disrupted the water supply to Tehran. Iran retaliated by attacking what it claimed was the source of the original strike. In Lebanon, Hezbollah-Israel fighting produced over 486 casualties. In Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the UAE, and other regional states, casualties from Iranian strikes accumulated daily. A friendly fire incident occurred when a Kuwaiti Air Force pilot shot down 3 U.S. F-15 fighters, killing the pilots. The conflict also produced the first warship sunk by submarine fire since World War II. A U.S. Navy submarine USS Charlotte sank the Iranian Navy frigate Iris Dina in the Indian Ocean. The ship had been returning from an international naval exercise where it carried no ammunition. The U.S. clearly knew this. 104 Iranian sailors were killed. 32 were rescued by Sri Lankan Navy vessels. The war destroyed what remained of diplomatic channels. Just 24 hours before the strikes, Oman's foreign minister announced that a breakthrough had been reached in nuclear negotiations. Iran had agreed to never stockpile enriched uranium and to accept full verification by the International Atomic Energy Agency. Oman stated that peace was within reach. The U.S. had disputed this characterization. American Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff had stated that Iran was insisting on its inalienable right to enrich uranium and was boasting that it possessed 460 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium, enough material for 11 nuclear weapons. All negotiations had ceased. Iran's new interim leadership council ruled out further talks. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi warned that any European military involvement in defense of Middle East allies would be considered an act of war against Iran. The UN Security Council met in an emergency session. Multiple countries condemned the US and Israeli strikes as violations of Iranian sovereignty under international law. Other nations condemned Iran's strikes on civilian infrastructure in neighboring countries. Russia and China abstained from voting on resolutions. The Security Council produced no binding action. The financial cost to the United States mounted steeply. Military analysts estimated the operational cost at between $890 million and $1 billion per day. This figure included aircraft carrier operations, fighter jet sorties, drone operations, missile expenditures, and support logistics. At that rate, a 4-week operation would cost between $25 and $28 billion. The strategic cost was harder to quantify but more consequential. The conflict disrupted global energy supplies. Crude oil prices surged. Insurance companies refused to cover ships transiting the Strait of Hormuz. Global markets experienced volatility. Multiple nations announced they would reduce dependence on Persian Gulf oil. U.S. military personnel were killed and wounded. Forward-deployed forces were under sustained attack. The Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group and the Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group were both operational in the region. A third carrier, the George H.W. Bush, was ordered to the Middle East. Naval vessels were defending against drone and missile attacks. Air defense systems were being consumed at high rates. Iran's response demonstrated several realities that pre-war assessments had perhaps underestimated. First, Iran's command structure was more resilient and decentralized than assumed. The death of Khamenei and top generals did not paralyze the IRGC. Instead, the organization continued conducting operations, sometimes in coordination with each other, sometimes independently. Mojtaba Khamenei, the former supreme leader's son, was announced as his successor, suggesting the succession had been prepared. Second, Iran's missile and drone inventory was larger than pre-war intelligence estimates had indicated. Iran rationed its remaining weapons rather than expending them all in the first week, suggesting military planners understood they faced a protracted conflict and wanted to preserve capability. Third, Iran's ability to activate regional proxies was intact. Hezbollah resumed operations. Iraqi militias activated. Houthi forces in Yemen, though not directly striking in this conflict's first phase, maintained positioning. The axis of resistance that Iran had built over decades of proxy warfare was functional and coordinated, even if somewhat decentralized. The conflict transformed the regional balance of power. Saudi Arabia, which had initially been urged by Trump to support the strikes, found itself under direct Iranian attack. The message was clear to Gulf states. Alignment with the US and Israel came with a direct cost. Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and the UAE all experienced Iranian strikes on military and civilian infrastructure. The economic disruption to their oil and gas industries was immediate and severe. Israel, having launched the opening strikes, sustained ongoing missile and drone attacks. Air raid sirens sounded multiple times daily in Tel Aviv, Haifa, and other cities. The Iron Dome air defense system intercepted many incoming missiles, but some penetrated the defenses. Israeli society faced the reality of direct Iranian retaliation in ways previous conflicts had not fully demonstrated. For the United States, the conflict demonstrated the limits of air power in achieving stated political objectives. The strikes had not produced rapid regime collapse. Iran's military had not been decisively defeated. The regional allies that the US was defending were suffering economic and security consequences. The global oil market was disrupted, and American personnel were in sustained combat against an adversary that, while militarily weaker, was clearly willing and capable of sustaining operations over extended timeframes. The conflict remained active and escalated. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth stated that the war had only just begun. Trump claimed that the war was very complete pretty much, then contradicted himself hours later, saying it would end soon, but that it represented the beginning of building a new country. The ambiguity in U.S. strategic objectives suggested that even senior American officials were uncertain about what military victory would look like. Was the goal regime change? Destruction of Iran's military? Preventing Iranian nuclear weapons? Securing regional oil supplies? Protecting Israel? Different officials offered different answers. Iran, meanwhile, signaled it was prepared for sustained conflict. Senior Revolutionary Guard commanders announced they were firing only missiles with 1,000-kilogram payloads, heavier, more destructive weapons that consume less inventory at higher strategic impact. This rationing strategy suggested Iran's military leadership was planning operations measured in months, not weeks. The cost in human lives and suffering continued to mount. Medical facilities were overwhelmed. Displacement was beginning. The global economy was feeling the first waves of disruption from closed shipping lanes and disrupted energy supplies. What had begun as a preemptive strike intended to produce rapid regime change had evolved into a regional war with no clear endpoint, no unified command on one side, and consequences extending far beyond the Middle East. The diplomatic solution that was within reach had been replaced by sustained military conflict. Whether the conflict would remain regional or expand further remained an open question that the world was watching with increasing alarm.